Hello my lovelies, welcome back to my channel and I hope you've had a really fabulous week. In today's video I'm going to be talking all things knitting. Instead of doing a make 9 this year, which is sewing focused, I am setting myself a knitting challenge. So for 2022 I'm calling it the 12 knits of the year, which sounds a bit strange now I'm saying it out loud, but bear with me. My aim is to knit 12 garments or items for my wardrobe, all vintage inspired. If you're a regular visitor to my little cottage by the sea and you're really into sewing but not knitting, I really won't be offended if you don't want to watch this video, because it's very heavy on the old loopy content. If you're as addicted to knitting as I have become over the last year, then stick around, because I am going to be sharing lots of vintage goodies and inspiration with you. And if you haven't subscribed and vintage sewing, knitting, making your own vintage inspired wardrobe is really what you're all about, then please feel free to subscribe. I'd love to have you join me on the journey. Knitting has been a real source of comfort for me. It's been a real solace. I like to do a bit of knitting first thing in the morning because it's very mindful, or mindlessness as I tend to find my brain, and actually very meditative, so I do it instead of meditating. Knitting is good for you. I'm wearing my favourite knit of the year, which is this black and pink bow sweater, accessorised with Loki here. It's from Susan Crawford's fabulous book, amazing book, A Stitch in Time, Volume 2. There is a Volume 1, surprisingly. I don't have that, but I'm sure that's equally good. There's loads of stuff in this book that I'd like to knit, and I will be showing you some things. I so enjoyed knitting this jumper. It was quite an involved make. It took me a while, and I just kind of stuck to the colours more or less that the book suggested, because as you know, black and pink is really my palette. I think I could have sized down. The body is a little bit big on me, but I went by the measurements. It's still really fabulous, and I even knitted the little shoulder pads so that I get the lovely shoulder poofling that needs to happen. Another successful knit that I knitted just before Christmas was actually my daughter's Christmas gift, which may seem incredibly bizarre to you, but her favourite film is the Alien films, Ridley Scott's Alien, and actually it's my least favourite film. I watched it when I was far too young and it traumatised me, so this knit was a challenge on many levels. I had nightmares the whole time that I was knitting this, but it really looked amazing, and when she opened the present she was blown away, and she said that it was the best gift that she had ever been given. It just filled me with so much happiness, because one of my favourite things to do when she was little was to knit all her little dolly clothes and make all the, and I would do it for every birthday and Christmas, and she loved playing with her dolls, so that was great fun. And then I haven't really done that much whilst she's been a teenager, because teenager, and it was just really lovely to make this for her. Another very successful knitted object of the year is one of my own products, which is the vintage tassel beret here, a leaflet that I published in 2020, and it's based off of a vintage pattern that my late mother and I found in Leeds. I didn't grow up with my mother and always had contact with her. It was quite a difficult relationship because of lots of her issues. She got very ill in her late 30s, and I basically decided to go and stay with her and help her, and it was a brilliant experience because it meant that we had a positive time together and a positive relationship. And one of the things that we enjoyed doing was to go thrifting, to go hunting for treasure in all the charity shops and jumble sales that were on at that time. And we found this vintage knitting pattern. My mother liked knitting. She bought it and I wrote out the recipe, the instructions, and we both knitted these berets because she was mad about berets and she loved Prince and her favourite song was Raspberry Beret. So this pattern means a huge amount to me because it's all about my mother and that time and something very positive that came out of something that had been very troubling and difficult and painful. The lovely illustration is actually done by Charlotte, who works with me on all of my products. She's very talented. I'll link her below because she does the most amazing illustrations and she's an ex-student of mine, so it's really wonderful to work with her and I just love all her stuff. She's got the most amazing talent and aesthetic, so go and follow her on everything and support her if you can. These are just a handful of the ones that I have knitted. There seems to be a theme here. They are all palette tone colour appropriate to my wardrobe, which I didn't actually notice until I put all of these together. So some of these colourways are actually available as kits on my website, and the pattern is a PDF and also a printed pattern as well. So if you're interested, I'll link them, and if you're interested, go and have a look, but no worries if you're not. And it's a really simple, satisfying knit, and I just feel like I can wear basically any of these. They go with my jumper. Loki approves of the berets. He's now plonked himself on those. It's been so lovely to see the vintage tassel beret out in the wild. There have been some fabulous versions of it being knitted up. Gussets and Godets made a lovely version in the cat's tongue, which is the pale pink, and also she has a wonderful YouTube channel, so I will link. Go and follow her because she makes lovely stuff. And She Sews Happiness on Instagram. She makes really fabulous stuff, and she made the black shiny one, which is called Night Work, inspired by the character Vanessa Ives in Penny Dreadful. So the pattern's very dear to my heart, and it means so much to me that people have bought it and made it because it has such meaning for me. And I just wanted to share just this little knitted brooch. I've been doing these mushroom workshops, and the inspiration actually came from this little knitted fly agaric mushroom that my mother knitted for me. So it's really sweet. I've done mine in fabric, but this one's really gorgeous and I treasure it. It's one of my most treasured things, and mushrooms are fabulous. I have set myself the challenge in 2022, the 2022 knitting challenge, and for this I want to knit myself 12 garments or items that work in my vintage inspired wardrobes. As I'm outfit planning, I am factoring in the sewing and then the knitting, and I want everything to tie in together. So I organised my knitting patterns in this fabulous vintage old knitting book that probably comes from the 80s. This was my late mother-in-law's. Very sadly, she passed away in 2021, and we had a shared love of knitting, and even though I have not been involved with her son, who is the father of my daughter, we were great friends, and she was my in case of emergency. So it was really lovely to be given all of her knitting paraphernalia and to have that as a memento. So here's my book with appropriately a kitten on there, and it's my knitting pattern file. And I'm not going to show you all of these, but I have put in all my vintage patterns that I've been collecting, and some of them I'm like not particularly interested in knitting. There's a Christmas jumper which needs to go on my list. The first thing that I wanted to knit was an Ascot scarf or a Miss Marple scarf. I got a free pattern on Ravelry, and I actually sat down and I have knitted that already. It's just in a cheap acrylic because I just wanted to give it a go. I knitted a few of these for friends for Christmas, so I'd had a bit of practice, but I really love this, and I'm going to knit a cream vintage tassel beret, and this is going to go with the coat that I am making, which you will see in next week's video, hopefully, fingers crossed. So I've knitted that. That's already ticked off. I feel very organised. The next thing that I wanted to knit was actually my own design, and it's this little jumper, which is inspired by my little cat Missy. So it's a little tribute to her, named for her, and it's a vintage inspired jumper with a moss stitch yoke, but it's knitting, double knitting, and I have it on my needles here. So it's not terribly complicated. It's quite good if you are, you know, new-ish to knitting and are daunted by 4-ply or fingering weight wool yarn. This is just a double knit, and it knits up fairly quickly. I have knitted the back, so it's knit in pieces, and there's the moss stitch texture, and then it will have a bow here, because bows. That's just one that I just wanted to do for myself, but actually I may work on sizing it in different sizes and put this out as a pattern later in the year. I started knitting this on Boxing Day, so I'm filming this on the 5th of January, so that's how much that I've knitted, and I've only been sitting there of an evening doing that. Another jumper on my list is also from Susan Crawford's A Stitch in Time Volume 2 book, and it's the Jan sweater. I ordered the wool for this from the Wool Warehouse before, you know, in December at some point as a little prezi to myself, and it's a 4-ply. I think it's called Old Rose or Old Pink, something like that. I bought 2 wools, I'll show you the other one in a minute, and they're almost the same colour. I have a very specific colour palette that I'm drawn to. I really like this jumper. It may be a little bit more summery. I may start this a little bit later in the year. I'm not a monogamous knitter. I just sort of have a smaller project on the go and a bigger project on the go, but I'm also working on and doing the final edit and test knit of a knitting pattern that will be coming out sort of imminently, really. So I've kind of got work knits that I'm doing, and then my own sort of personal knitting that I'm doing. I really like the eyelet details of this jumper. I haven't really done anything like that, knitted anything like that, so that will be a nice thing to do and another make made. I treated myself and joined Squid School of Knitting over on Patreon. Squidney Knits is an amazing knitter. She has a wonderful Instagram and is very inspiring, and each month she's putting out a knitting pattern, and last month's was the home front sweater, which is it's very similar really to this silhouette without the kind of ruching ribbony details. And there's a knit along for that. I would like to take part in that. She's got other lovely patterns as well, so do check her out. I am thinking that I want to knit it in a black, just so that it goes with everything. It's a 4-ply knit, and yeah, I'm just waiting to get a little bit of spare cash so that I can order that wool. Another jumper that I would like to make, this is all very jumper heavy, I'm aware, is from Subversive Femme. She is Bex the Femme on Instagram, and she has a knitting company. There are some free knits that you can knit up. She has patterns for curvier people, and she's adapted this pattern, I think, from a vintage one and worked out all the sizing for you, and I really love this jumper. I think I want to knit this in an arsenic green with the ribbon parts in maybe an ivory or cream. So again, that's something that I want to knit at some point, but I've got to get the wool for that. The knit that I want to make later in the year is the Arachne knit by Andy Satterland. I think this is a fabulous one. I've never knitted any of her patterns, but they always look really good and people review them very well. I'd like to knit this for my daughter, whose birthday is on October, and October's my favourite month of the year anyway because it's Halloween. So I would like to knit that for her, maybe one for myself as well. Who are we kidding? Another goal will be to practice some colour work and Fair Isle knitting. I particularly liked this Fair Isle twin set, a jumper and a cardigan. The cardigan especially, although maybe you kind of have to do them together, I don't really know. I thought that would be a really nice thing to aim towards making. And the final thing that's on my must knit this year list is the Trimmed in Roses twin set cardigan and jumper, also from Susan Crawford. Who wouldn't love this jumper? I basically want to recreate it more or less exactly as is, but instead of the sort of tanny oatmeal-y colour, I would go more for cream, I think, with the pink roses, and then maybe have black stripes on it. I'm not entirely sure. I'd really like to knit this for myself by the end of the year because it's the thing that I saw on Pinterest and it really reignited my love of knitting, and up until that point I hadn't realised that you could buy new patterns that were all sized up and usable for the modern knitter. I'd looked at vintage patterns and just found them slightly gobbledygooky. So those are my things that I'm really wanting to knit. That's 8 things, so there are a few more, but we shall see. One of them's already knitted, so that's all great, and one of them's in process. The last few things that I wanted to share with you, I've joined a knitting group, so I'm really looking forward to getting on with all my knits and having a nice drink while I knit, preferably not alcoholic because, you know, that could be disastrous. And just the company. I did the knit-a-thon for refugees just before Christmas, and that was such a lovely thing to do and really nice to just spend time with people who love the same thing that you do. And one of the ladies, Deborah, who I've known since I moved here, she was one of the first people that I met when I moved to Hastings. She works in the Crown and we live in the same road, and she very kindly said to me that she had some knitting books that she was going to give to charity because she didn't need them. Would I like them? They're vintage, they're quite old, and I said absolutely. So on Christmas Eve she popped these round, which honestly I had to have a little cry when she'd gone because I was so grateful and moved, and it was just such a thoughtful thing, and they are amazing. So the first one is this one, Oddham's Encyclopedia of Knitting. This amazing lady teaching her daughter to knit, because that's what we women do. Look, kitten. And it really is an encyclopedia. It's like literally got, it goes through every kind of knitting, argyle knitting. Look, for when you play golf, you've got a golf sweater. And also the other thing that's really good about this book, that's some pretty things as well, is that it's got sizing charts. So if you've got the vintage patterns, what I wanted to do with my vintage patterns was to be able to work out how to resize them. So I'm hoping that with this book, and by doing Squid School of Knitting and understanding that process of how many stitches and gauge, it's gonna help with my own projects. And, you know, I'll be able to knit up a lot more true vintage patterns for myself because I just love them. And then the other one was a real, this made my heart go, because I've been trying to buy this book on eBay for such a long time, and it's the Pictorial Guide to Modern Home Knitting. I've got the dressmaking version of this, and it's really just so beautiful. And again, it's everything that you need for knitting, and it's vintage. It's from 1941, so there's just, you know, every page is just delightful, and it's just got so many patterns in there. I feel like I need a quickly knitted Spencer in my life, and just all the basic information that you need. Lots of, look, a close fitting hat. So I am fully prepared, ready to go on my 2022 knitting challenge. Really exciting adventures in wool, and I will keep you updated. I am not going to do lots and lots of knitting content, but I'm going to drop in a few knitting things here and there and just share my knitting with you as I'm sharing my sewing with you. I hope that that's something that you will enjoy. And if you have some suggestions for some knitting patterns or resources that you think would be really helpful for me and for every other knitting addict who's watching, then do drop your ideas and thoughts in the comments below. It's really great to share our knowledge and our passion here. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching and spending time with me in my cottage by the sea. I hope that wherever you are, you're keeping safe and well, and remember that whether we're knitting, sewing, repurposing, making gifts for other people, just making something to cheer ourselves up and gladden our hearts, we're making the world a better place one stitch at a time. I shall see you next week, my lovelies. Take care. Bye.